So today is our session Living Well with Less, Money, Simplicity, Sufficiency, and Post-Growth Futures. Before we begin, I would like to, of course, acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we're all joining from and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. And I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today, of course. This session is going to invite us to rethink prosperity, simplicity, and what it means to live well. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have sustained complex societies on this continent for tens of thousands of years without organizing life around perpetual economic growth, mass consumption, accumulation, or imperialism for that matter. So, as we explore these ideas of sufficiency, community, and non-monetary futures today, I hope that we also continue to reflect on the wisdom embedded in cultures that have long understood well-being as something grounded in relationality, in connection to country, community, kinship, and collective care. So, one of the biggest questions that is facing the degrowth movement is not simply why I think we need to move beyond endless economic growth, but also how we would actually live in a post-growth world. If our societies are organized less around consumption, competition, and accumulation, what would take their place? What would everyday life look like? How would our needs be met? And how would we find meaning, build community, and experience prosperity without relying on ever-increasing incomes and material consumption? I don't know. It might be easier in some ways. Today's panel is going to bring together two people who've spent many years exploring these questions in practice. Through their work on The Simpler Way and Living More with Less, Ted Trainer and Jon have been experimenting with what it means to create lives and communities grounded in sufficiency, resilience, generosity, and connection. Each will give a short presentation before moving into a facilitated discussion, and finally we'll have a Q&A with you guys. So please leave questions in the chat throughout the talks, and yeah, I will read them out when we get to the end. So hopefully together we're going to be able to explore not only the ideas behind degrowth, but what some of the practical realities of living differently might be, what we might gain, and also what we might need to let go of, and how we could begin to build the foundations for a good life beyond growth. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tarek. I'm a board director of the New Economy Network Australia, and I'm also a member of our strategic directions group. So we're a member-led cooperative supporting collaboration, learning, and action towards a just and regenerative economy in Australia and hopefully beyond. Our session today is supported by our Degrowth Hub, which is a space for exploring exactly these sorts of questions around post-growth futures, sufficiency, well-being, and alternatives to growth-dependent economic systems. So if you'd like to continue these conversations beyond today, we'll share details at the end about how to join the Nenosphere and get involved with the hub. So firstly, we have Jon. Jon and wife Emily, it's Emily, yeah, are,
Yes.
are the creators of Living More with Less, a family experiment in better, fairer, and less harmful ways of living. Their project focuses on identifying opportunities to improve quality of life through practices of sufficiency, resilience, capability, generosity, and community building. Through their social media platforms and presentations, they encourage people to bring the future to us by embodying post-growth values in daily life right now. So yeah, I'll introduce Ted first as well, and then I'll just let you both speak one after the other. So, Ted is an Australian academic, author, and longtime advocate for simpler ways of living beyond consumer capitalism. He's best known for developing The Simpler Way, a vision for a low consumption, cooperative, and localized society grounded in sufficiency and ecological sustainability. He's spent decades exploring practical alternatives to growth-dependent economies through his Pigface Point demonstration site, which showcases low-impact living, self-sufficiency, and community resilience in practice. So, please welcome both our speakers, and I'll now hand over to Jon and Emily, and yeah, let you guys share whatever you'd like to on the screen.
Thanks very much. Oh, it's very busy. All right. So I have just loaded our website. I haven't prepared slides today, so forgive me while I talk to material that I've prepared previously. Thank you very much, Tarek, for the introduction and the acknowledgement of the opportunities that we have here that we've been afforded um, by being in this very prosperous country that we're in. So, as Tarek mentioned, Emily and I have spent most of our adult lives exploring what it means to live well and how we can uh, apply our values into our daily lives. And for us, that has come down to what we've summarized as our project. We really want to get the most out of life. We consider that if we are focused just on averting crisis or minimizing environmental impacts, then there's little left to live for. So we want to look at both sides of the picture there, both living more, that's getting more out of life, and doing it in a way that is fair for everyone in the present and for future generations, not just of humans, but of all living beings. So our core message that we're trying to adopt and to share is that we can all make a difference in the world, both for better and for worse. And one of the big ways we look at that is by celebrating the opportunities that we have and recognizing the abundance that we're surrounded with, we can feel less like we're missing out on things and also find opportunities to give to others and directly address inequality. So we give about a quarter of our income to effective charities. And in doing so, improving the quality of lives of likely hundreds to thousands of people statistically, and saving the lives of people who would not have otherwise been able to survive. Second message is that we need to scale back our lives. I think everyone here recognizes the necessity of that. And that if we don't do that, then the chances of having a flourishing future are slim to none. But also that life is better with less, which is why we're talking about primarily today. That aiming higher and looking for perfection and trying to fit the mold grinds us down. We spend our whole lives working to pay for things that we don't really need and missing out on opportunities to do the things that matter. So we emphasize that by consuming less, we can work less, we have more time for the things that actually matter to us. And those are the things that actually drive happiness and improve resilience. And by making time to do the things that make life feel good, but also help us to feel accomplished, then we don't feel like we're missing out on anything at all. So well, I've recorded back in February. I spent a day, a Saturday in the community, just going about my day, and I thought this feels like a fairly community heavy day. It would be interesting to record this and then look back over it in the future. And so since we're talking about what does a post-growth future look like now, I feel like this day in February that I've made some notes on is a good example of just going through what I did from when I woke up to when I went to bed. And that might seem, I guess, a little bit boring or dry. So to make it interesting for people, I would like to explore and invite people to identify aspects of the day that are attributed to it being a good day in terms of what's good for us, in terms of health and purpose. So this acronym PERMAH, PERMAH, is used in Australia and a few other places as a framework to identify well-being. It's used in the state education system, for instance. And we haven't really deliberately tried to apply these aspects. We've recognized that they're important for us to have a good life. And then we've kind of retroactively considered how are the actions that we're undertaking naturally kind of meeting these ideas. So we'll just go through them there as they're on the screen. One is positive emotion. So by identifying the things in our lives that we are fortunate to have, like, that we were born in Australia, that we have clean air to breathe, that there's running water and so on. Practicing that deep gratitude down to the simplest level, and also the ability just to be amazed by life in itself, and practicing finding awe. Um, Engagement in the present, so not just kind of going on autopilot, but being really deliberate about how we spend our time, who we engage with, how the choices that we make affect our values, and noticing what's going on around us. So, listening with all of our senses. Relationships, and all of the longitudinal studies on kind of happiness and fulfillment, relationships come out at kind of number one as the things that people have valued, and that good relationships have consistently kept people on the happier side of quality of life. But we're not just talking about interpersonal relationships. We also find that the relationships that we can build with ourselves, and recognizing our role in nature and kind of in the broader universe, all of those things, if we can add more care and love to those relationships and consideration, then it makes life richer and more rewarding. Meaning, so doing the things, living in a way that feels right to live, rather than just getting by. So I guess recognizing there's a privilege in being able to do that. But if we can do that, then that's something that we ought to do. Where there's many other things that we can do, but we shouldn't necessarily do just because we can. And doing activities that help us to feel accomplished. So all of these things are just hacking brain chemistry, of course, but we can do it in a way that builds long-term well-being, or we can do it in a way that's just like instant reward. So by choosing the way that we spend our time in things that are practical and make life easier in some ways, or build our resilience or our capabilities, and mean that we can depend less on harmful systems, give us a sense of accomplishment, but also help to reinforce this whole cycle, and in the long term, build a loop of positivity. And then health. So it's difficult to feel well if you are unwell physically. Many of the activities that we do give us opportunity to do the things that humans evolved to do. That's being outside, be with people, get plenty of sunlight, experience nature, and sleep better, ideally, as well as exercise. So those things each of those kind of adds to our well-being, whether we are really focused on it, or whether it just happens due to the ways that we live our lives. So I'll go through now 20 notes or thereabouts that I made for a Saturday that I spent. A weekday is a little bit different because many of the people who I interacted with are still going about their daily lives as they are. For context, Emily and I now work about the equivalent of 1 day a week. I work casually as an engineer, kind of half an hour at a time, slotted through the week, mostly remotely. And Emily's a teacher, working 1 or 2 days a week. And that enables us to continue giving to charities without drawing down too much on what we managed to save. And our frugal living over the last 20 years, we worked out, saved us about $2 million, which is about the equivalent of our net worth. And that means that we can live this way without any real risk of financial catastrophe. We've got a lot of flexibility about what we do in our lives. And we have very small outgoings because of the way that we've chosen to live, while we've continued to give away about $40,000 or $50,000 a year to those effective charities. So Saturday, the 7th of February, in the morning, I read Braiding Sweetgrass. So getting some cultural context and putting things in space. Breakfast, I had bread, which we had retrieved from dumpster diving, which you might see as a feature through here. If this is a post-growth future where waste is far less abundant, you can imagine that this is foraged or exchanged. There is still excess to be found and to be traded. We have hummus that's homemade, peanut butter that was gifted, strawberry or strawberry jam that was from salvaged strawberries thrown out daily, and bananas, which were from a neighborhood tree. I had a game of Scrabble with my daughter, and then I exchanged some messages with the Degrowth Network Australia, so community building online presence, and messaged a college friend whose birthday it was. While I was online, I researched what was involved in planting sugarcane because friends of ours who had been to a party or who were coming to a party had sugarcane growing, and we juiced that and shared it as our treat on their birthday. So I'm curious, I guess, of these so far, who has thought about where the aspects of perma have applied already, and I'll continue on. I spent some time sorting through old fruit, which we had rescued, some of it to compost or others to make more preservatives. I cleaned up after making golden syrup at home. So I mentioned the sugarcane that had been juiced. So there was sugarcane doesn't keep very long, but golden syrup keeps for months. So it evaporated some in the sun. I tried grinding arrowroot into flour, arrowroot that we had grown as part of our permaculture garden. That was a fail. I can't remember why I failed. That's just what I wrote down here, but hopefully I learned from it. I went for a bicycle ride to the market. So we live car free generally, and this means that we are forced to go slower. We live a bit closer, and we get that time outside and exposed, an opportunity to say hi to the people who we pass. On my way out the door, I ran into a tenant who lives in our granny flat. We had an unused shed that was a waste of space, a waste of money while we we're experiencing a housing crisis. So we fitted that out and we rented out at slightly below market rates and have a young couple living there. I offered him tools which I had collected from a neighbor. An elderly neighbor was moving out and didn't have the emotional capacity to sort through his shed. So everything that he'd collected over the past 50 years was just going into a skip bin. I offered to rescue those things and find a new home for them. And I managed to rehome the majority of them and build more relationships with the neighborhood, with the neighbors in the process. At the market, I found an apple on the ground that had had one bite taken out of it. I washed it and it was my morning tea. It was food, right, that was grown and wasn't to be wasted. I didn't need to go and buy a fresh one. I spoke with the friend who I met at the market, which is why I was going to the market, about dumpster diving. She had racked up her $50 or so bill for a fresh produce there, and I mentioned that I hadn't spent anything on food for the past several months. And so she got very excited about going diving, and we just went on the spot. We toured a couple of different grocery stores, and she was disgusted by the waste that was there, and anyone who's been will probably find the same. But it was a good opportunity to spend the time with that friend, and we were supported one another, building that relationship as well. And then I rode home via another dumpster, which I knew was on the way. Spent some time just chilling out in the park, looking up at the trees, huge fig trees that must have been there for hundreds of years, thinking about how lucky it was that the council chose to leave those couple of trees there at that time. They were still providing so much shade on what was a really hot day, and appreciating that there was running water at the council park. At home, I cleaned and sorted the groceries that I had recovered. Among it was honey and mayonnaise that had just been had got sticky from an adjacent product had spilled, but there was nothing wrong with those ones. So I donated them to the local food bank, which is a short walk away. While walking through the neighborhood, I saw a neighbor, I won't give their real names, but I saw a neighbor D, who I spoke to about sailing. Emily and I have been in the process of learning to sail so that we can visit other countries with minimal fuel consumption. Something that we still won't do well as a fuel crisis, but perhaps one day in the future. And I loaned him a wide mouth shovel. I have all like many tools in the garden, and especially ones from the neighbors. And he was going about a job in a very difficult way. So I made his life a little easier and built that relationship. I saw neighbor P, who was moving pot plants out of the vehicle, and my son and I helped him unload them and exchanged tips about how he could care for these plants, which he was looking after for a friend for a few months. I saw neighbor M. These neighbors are fortunately in their driveway or in their front yard, and I'm not afraid to call out and greet them, which took some courage over the years to get up the confidence to interact with people in that way, even though it really ought to be so normalized. I discussed our dumpster diving with this fairly conservative neighbor of ours, and he admitted that he is a real carnivore. We'd rather really not be eating much meat because of the harm that it does. But he was very enthusiastic about taking meat, knowing where it came from, which was a surprise to us and a solution for this dilemma when we find so much of it at times. I got a message from another neighbor, Jay, who had heard about our social media project and was offering to help with our IT. And he also shared his excitement about fermenting and preserving, growing things, and doing research. So we exchanged some ideas. And I went to the park with my son and daughter and saw some other neighbors along the way. Their child joined us. And we also chatted about them taking our old Lego, which we have a big collection of. And we didn't want to go to waste, but the children no longer play with it. So it was great to have that solution. I met a few new neighbors as well who were out cleaning their car or walking their dog. And kind of they've been in the neighborhood for a long time, but I hadn't actually introduced myself before. So it was pleasant to exchange some details. In the evening, my son, who is 13, cooked vegetarian burgers with rescued bacon. While I caught up with Emily, who had spent the day doing some sailing practice in at the bay, which is a free or almost free activity.
I think I was sailing to Cairns.
Oh, no, not that. No, no, you weren't. I don't think. Or maybe you were sailing to Cairns. All right, so Emily was on a free holiday. And then in the evening, I shared some video for our social media content, which is along these themes, and replied to communication on there. Played cards with my children, and after they had settled down, I supported another neighbor via a message who was going through some relationship challenges. And when I've been through our own challenges in the past and felt that we were able to empathize in some way and provide a bit of support. And then I continued to do a little more reading in the evening, probably along the same book, but I didn't know what that was. So the day that you pick a few themes there's a lot of food related things, community, exercise, games, all the sorts of things which were a part of traditional societies for the majority of history, and that we have become averse to or being commodified, or we don't have the time or the energy for in the current dominant economic model. So that's a Saturday. Weekdays will probably look quite different because fewer people are available and are out and about. We spend more time in our gardens or preserving food and researching and preparing content that hopefully can inspire or inform other people to get more out of their lives too. So that's pretty much what we have to share. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Yeah, wonderful. I'll ask Ted, do you want to go ahead now? Do you have any slides?
No slides.
Okay, no worries at all. Yeah, take it away then.
Okay, well, thanks, Terry. I want to come to the simplicity theme in a somewhat roundabout way. I first want to focus on the polycrisis. Most people, I think, do not understand how big and serious it is. So I want to quickly outline some of the major elements in it and make my point about why I'm raising that first then. Firstly, there's a resource scarcity issue. Mineral grades falling, fisheries overfished, water, major global problem, forest timber, even rubber and even sand are now scarcities, all increasing costs feeding into COSI. Second element, of course, is the environmental problem, climate, many effects of climate, soil damage, soil loss, a big food problem coming up, ocean acidification, loss of species. You could go on for a long time detailing that terrible problem. The poisoning of the environment by the amount of toxic materials we're pouring into it. Now, all of those environmental problems are increasing costs, storms, fire, drought, and so on. Then there's the economic realm. We have a grotesquely unjust economic system, just to pick one element. It traps the poorer countries in an economic process which fundamentally enriches the rich countries because it drains the resources out. It's been estimated that trillions of dollars of wealth every year get siphoned from them to us. And we could not have anything like our rich living standards if that wasn't happening. The economic system also, of course, is increasing inequality at an accelerating rate. I heard yesterday that 19 people have wealth equal to the poorest 4 billion people on the planet. Now, there's a recent book by Lewis Kemp called The Goliath Trap. And it's a very important book because it points out that throughout history, Goliaths have arisen. That's a small number of people or a king who gather more and more resources to themselves and thereby ultimately kill society. The Goliaths inevitably fail and crash, and the book, I think, is one of the major points it makes is that we're on that path. We have a rapidly increasing inequality, which leads to increasing power in the hands of the rich, and they gear things more and more to their own benefit and deprive and impoverish society in general. So that's leading to loss of cohesion. The economy is not providing well for all people, and that leads to, of course, the emergence of Trump and Hanson and ultimately fascism. Now, the market inevitably pushes in that direction. We have a market system which allocates resources primarily to the rich. You don't make good profits producing things that poor people want. If you allow the market to determine what's developed and who gets it, inevitably you don't provide well for the poor. Finally, the biggest worry is the financial system, because some of those previous worries are slowly gathering force, but the financial system is in a terribly precarious situation and could go down in hours. The global debt is now much greater than it was before the GFC. Nobody thinks it's repayable. And at some point, the lenders will realise they're never going to get their money back. And so they'll immediately try and pull out their resources and stop making credit available. Now, what I'm trying to say is that the polycrisis is enormous and it's barely impacted yet. And it's due to too much producing and consuming going on. The point is that the case for large-scale degrowth is irrefutable, and most people don't realise that. Even many green people who think minor savings and green growth, that'll solve the problem. So I think we have to begin this kind of discussion leading to simplicity by recognising the immensity of our predicament and the fact that we're on the path to collapse. If we're lucky, it'll be a slow onset Goldilocks one, which is just serious enough to wake us up. If we're unlucky, and I think we will be unlucky, it'll be a sudden catastrophic collapse. And people don't understand this. Our elites don't understand. There are 226 federal members of parliament down there in Canberra, and I've never heard one of them recognise that growth is not just absurd now, it's actually suicidal. Not one of them. So there's our problem. It's a very, very big task we degrowthers and related people face. We have to help people to realise that growth is ridiculous. Market forces cannot be allowed to drive the economy, and the profit motive cannot. We have to develop extremely different, radically different systems, not just one system. The most obvious system is the economy, but we have to develop alternative settlement patterns, political systems, and above all, a radically different culture. That is the focal concern. We have to try and get people to abandon growth and affluence as life goals and definitions of progress and accept, as Jon just said, the notion of simpler living, not just in order to save the planet and avoid catastrophe, but as liberation, as ways of avoiding the rat race and finding sources of satisfaction which are far more rewarding. Degrowth, in my analysis, which is based on many numerical considerations, must involve reductions in per capita consumption rate of something like 70% or more, probably more. It's not just fiddling a bit with cutting expenditure on this and that and maybe having the holidays driving around Australia rather than going to Bali. It's much more than that is required to defuse the problems. So let me say a little bit about what I think the solution has to be, which I have labelled the simpler way. The amount of degrowth needed can only be achieved, in my very firm view, if we move to settlements which are highly self-sufficient, highly self-governing, cooperative, and based on, as I've said, localism and a culture that is very different. So some of the elements would have to be local economies driven by needs, not profits, many committees, local assemblies that make the decisions as to how we're going to run things around here, working bees, lots of commons, collective property, ponds, forests, windmills, workshops, neighbourhood centre and things like that. One of the most important committees would be the leisure committee that designs things like adventure trails and organises concerts and talks and festivals and celebrations and localised holidays. How about for your holiday you hire a gypsy cart and a map and you go to all the local little farms and towns that are interesting. Now your welfare is going to depend on the quality of your village and not on your wealth. Your monetary wealth will be almost entirely irrelevant. Your quality of life will depend on how well your town or village is functioning, and the rewards and incentives that are there. The incentives for everyone to help make that town work well are very powerful because you'll all realise that your quality of life depends on how well it works. So the town will require good citizenship, but it will reward good citizenship. Now, the social form that I've argued for and outlined there is the only way we can get those resource consumption rates down. I want to illustrate that claim by looking at our study of egg supply. We went into the numbers on embodied costs and dollar costs, and we found that the dollar and energy costs of supplying eggs via the conventional supermarket chain were in the region of 100 times those that you can achieve by producing eggs in local co-ops and backyards. The conventional path involves global chains, fishing fleets getting food to put into pellet mills, factories to produce those chicken feeds, chemical inputs which mean that the waste, the chicken manure can't be reused, has to be thrown away, contributing to the environmental costs, let alone the dollar costs. You have transport at all those stages. You have experts, highly trained people sitting at computers working out logistics. You have workers who drive to work. You have packaging, advertising, and supermarkets. The backyard path eliminates almost all of that. And in addition, it enables the food scraps to be recycled to the local gardens, compost heaps, and animal food inputs. Into the aquaculture, the compost heaps. So you're producing some of your own food through this change of industrial structure. You also eliminate the need for sewer mains because you don't need to pump all those waste away into the ocean. They're going to the nearby gardens. So proximity in the village, lots of functions close together makes a lot of these things possible. You've also got working bees, rosters, committees, which build social interaction, provide lots of interesting things for people to do. Now, that contrast is possible in many other domains, most obviously other food production and things like local industries of a small scale, furniture production, making clothes, pottery, and services like aged care. We enable the old people to remain in the town much longer because we have rosters and to drop in and to help out with some of the things that need to be done. And the aged care centre is right in the centre of town, so people can drop in and have a chat, and the old people can still see the gardens and the chickens. Far better quality of life for them. Now, this is a discussion of systems. The most important thing in enabling the per capita national resource use rates to go down is the transition to more sane and better systems. Lifestyle changes are crucial too, and I'll come to that a little more lately, but I'm trying to emphasise the significance of localisation and better systems, and my claim is that only the village can do that. The village solves many other problems as well. No driving to work, no need to build anything like as many infrastructures, freeways, shipping port, because our world is so dependent on international trade, as we're painfully realising now with the Iranian crisis. We have no unemployment or poverty in the village. Why? Because we've got the sense to make sure everyone is provided for. There's plenty to do, so we share out the work and the contributions. We have a relaxed pace because far less work is required. In this society, I reckon we work about 3 times too hard. So if we stop producing all the nonsense and the infrastructures to support it, then we can get by on far less work. I think we'd need to work for money maybe 2 or 3 days a week. And we gain the benefits of far better physical and mental health. You've got community, you've got friendly people close by, you've got a relaxed pace, much less work, far less strain, stress, anxiety. The biggest health problem in this society, they say now, is depression. Well, the village is the best solution to that. Now, one other thing that really has to be clear, and a lot of people aren't clear enough about it, is that all this means you've got to scrap capitalism. Capitalism is utterly incompatible with any of this because it is a growth system. We've got to degrow enormously. Capitalism cannot do that. And we've got to stop market forces being the major determinant of what happens. I believe we could still have a small role for the market, and I believe that most firms could be privately owned. I think Marx is wrong about thinking that the productive capacity has to be all publicly owned. There's a lot of satisfaction to be got from running your own little business or farm the way you want to do it. And that's okay, I think, as long as we have strict social guidelines that stop those little guys trying to become tycoons. It's not a matter of stopping them. It's a matter of maintaining the condition in which they find running their own little business entirely satisfying, and living in a village which they serve and benefit from means that they're not interested in becoming a tycoon. Now, that I think is an enormously radical change from the way we do things now, with gigantic globalized networks and enormous trade. Apparently, haddock is caught off Scotland and transported to China or Taiwan or something, gutted, put in tins, transported back to be eaten in Scotland. Obviously, the village solves those and many other problems. Now, one of the implications of this, I think, is that the vision is not a socialist vision. A lot of people think that the degrowth path requires socialism, and Jason Hickel is now arguing that. And I think there are mistakes here. Ultimately, we're going to end up with a society that is basically socialist in a sense I'll try and fill out, a kind of socialism. But now, and for a long time to come, the vision and the focus and the work has to be driven by an anarchist vision, not a socialist vision. The distinction is huge because if you don't like the word anarchism, well, use the words participatory democracy of equals, because that's the form of anarchism we want. Some forms of anarchism are nasty and we don't want them, but that village will be run on anarchist principles. It's not rule from the top. You cannot run that village by a centralised state. The state can't do it. The forms, the decisions, the geography, the permaculture has to be sorted out, thought out, discussed and organised at the local level, because it's only local people who know the conditions, know the people, and can make the right decisions for the town. They know the history, they know the people. Now, the logic of thinking a socialism is a goal for the short term is mistaken. You could not have a socialist government unless most people wanted it. That means we can't get to that situation unless we have many, many years of hard work developing that culture, getting people to see that we have to run things in these new ways, and therefore getting them willing to vote for a government which would support all that and do those few things at the centre which are necessary to enable the villages to thrive. Now, a little bit about the personal level, and the kinds of things Jon have described are, of course, ideal and marvellous. And our task is to get people to see that that's where greater satisfaction lies. I'm not going to give you a list of things you can do. I'm going to argue that getting people to see those things and appreciate them and see that they are richer and better is the task for we degrowthers to work on here and now. The transition at that cultural level must come to be understood as not about accepting grudgingly deprivation and hardship in order to save the planet. It's about recognising that a much better quality of life is possible on that alternative path. And long ago, Thoreau realised that if you buy less, you need to earn less money, and you've got less time to do other things, is a point which Jon made. Much of the consuming going on, I think, is simply due to the lack of alternatives. Most people they live in dormitory suburbs, which are from one horizon to the next, full of houses where people don't even know their neighbours, and there's nothing to do except go and buy things, go shopping and consume. Whereas that village, of course, is full of alternative things to do. Another big trap is obviously the stress put in this society on status, image, appearance and so on, and success. Terrible trap. Climbing the company ladder, working too hard, achieving. We are obsessed with doing, and of course we should be more concerned with just being. And some of the things Jon mentioned are about smelling the roses, sitting in the park and looking at those marvellous trees. This society is marvellous at making us discontented. Most people are stressed because they want more of something, either possessions or satisfaction, and the anger is growing, and it's in the interests of the capitalist class to have us discontented, because then we'll strive to buy and so on. We have to obviously become more contented with what is sufficient. And one of the areas where we make our biggest mistake is housing. I could go on for a long time about the fact that the average house in this society in Australia is just about the world's biggest, 240 square metres. And you can make a beautiful little house for almost nothing if you build it out of earth and you use your own labour, guided by a local builder. There's a range of things here. My caretaker's cottage would cost today to build probably $20,000, and it's built to council standards, and had it been built out of earth would be far, far cheaper than that. So sufficiency is a crucial concern, and small things, learning to be, getting people to be content with little things. Well, I once knew a little old lady who would delight in the flowers, in the weeds beside the path. She'd go off ecstatically about how beautiful they are. Now contrast that with Kerry Packer, who was Australia's richest man, who once went into a casino and gambled $4 million. Who is the richer? That little lady's far richer than him. He's only rich in terms of money. He is spiritually impoverished. So a big part of our problem is to encourage appreciation of the things we have, which Jon mentioned, appreciation of the little things, the simple things. I'm not very good at this because I'm too busy trying to save the planet, and it's proving to be very difficult. But some of the things I get appreciation from are the smell of veggies cooking, the models I make, the things I've made that work okay. I once made a windmill and I once made a caretaker's cottage. I like old clothes. I like repairing them, sewing, recycling. Again, I think what matters most is working with others and in the interest of others to try and change the mindset, to try and change the culture by argument and writing and explanation, but also by demonstration. And that's what Jon has been showing that he does. The cultural problem is the focal one for the degrowth movement now. The focal problem is not trying to get governments to implement degrowth changes because they won't listen. They can't make those changes. They don't even know that they're necessary. So to me, that all of that defines what we degrowthers have to work on now. And it's rather thankless, and you won't see a lot for your efforts, but it's heroic work. We're in the business of getting off the terrible trap we've been in for 10,000 years, and that is allowing us to be ruled by a few at the top, allowing that centralisation and tyranny to determine how we live and the wars we go and fight on their behalf. We have to change from that path, and the changing of the cultural mindset is the beginning point, which we are working on and have to focus on.
Thanks so much, Ted. That was amazing. Okay, I will, yeah, where to begin with that? Let me think. Hmm.
And
So I
I
guess I'll start with
people where I'm wrong, what I'm
mm,
overestimating, what's
mm,
possible, am I too optimistic, and so on.
mm, mm,
Because many people do kick back when you introduce
mm,
simplicity, let alone
mm,
the radical version that I've put forward, and we'd have to deal with
mm.
criticisms of it.
Yeah. So I think a good place to start. There's been a question in the chat, and I was wondering the same thing. Um, I'll sort of just phrase this in my own way, paraphrase a bit the sentiment of the question. But so you mentioned that the politics can't be a socialist politics because, we need to get people to vote that way. Likewise, you seem to feel the same way about degrowth in terms of there's no point engaging really with the current mainstream representative political system because that degrowth mentality is just not represented there. And there's, given the polycrisis and the potential for collapse, there's probably not enough time to shift those perspectives. But on the other hand, if you want to completely reorganize Australian culture and society, um, how do you do that without state power? Because the vision is so radical, I think it's a great vision. It's actually coheres a lot with the sort of thinking that I've been looking at, and that I agree with the vision, and I think that that is a viable alternative, probably one of the only viable alternatives. But the difficulty is due to path dependency of societies and culture and economic systems. How do you go from here to there? Because for me, the easiest way would be, well, let's organize and let's shift consciousness and let's try to get that degrowth perspective represented in a little bit in the mainstream discourse and in the political system. And maybe we can shift things a tiny bit because in an ideal world, I agree with the anarchist vision at the end, but there's almost this contradiction from my point of view where you might be well served leveraging state power in order to incentivize this massive national shift of, well, you could incentivize, you could put government, the resources of the state into incentivizing people to relocate and take up this new form of uh, this new way of being and living. There could be a role for that, I think. But then at the same time, you don't want to have a centralized state actually controlling things at the local level. So just one more thing I will say is there's a bit of an interesting overlap with I hate John Howard, but he's one of a long list of Australian politicians who are interested in this idea of doing away with the states and having one unified federal government that is then mostly made up of different regions. And I'm very interested in that concept of maybe you have like a very loose state structure, and then you have mostly the government is run at regional levels and you just do away with the states. But again, whenever we think about that, it's a huge radical transformation. We have political systems that are currently developed in certain ways due to historical processes. How do you go from here to there? That's the basis of the question. And in on a large enough scale to actually shift things, because I understand people going out individually and having intentional communities, but how do you shift the entire basis of the country towards that?
Yes, look, there's things to clarify there. Um, by all means, demand things of a degrowth kind from government, make a fuss, call for those sort of changes. They won't implement them,
Mm,
but the process of harassing government is an educative activity. It
mm,
gets our point of view heard by more people. And in addition, we can push governments, especially local governments, to help implement some of the things that we want, like especially community gardens, because those are the beginnings of building alternatives, prefiguring, as the anarchists say, alternative structures within this existing capitalist consumer society. It is a good thing to build those alternatives of many kinds, and the transition towns movement's doing this, and in the process, immunising themselves more from the coming collapse
mm,
by becoming more localised and self-sufficient.
mm,
But so yes, do things that impinge on the existing political system, but do them not with the expectation that
mm,
governments will implement much. They
mm,
will not implement anything that interferes with growth. So get that clear.
mm,
Try and lever them, use their subsidies and money if you can get it, to build those community gardens,
mm,
but make them primarily educational devices. Fill them up with dioramas and information boards and people who would pounce on a visitor and explain, look, this is what we're doing because our ultimate goal is degrowth.
mm,
Um, and a comment on look, the whole transition thing is so problematic. My view is it can only come via an after collapse.
mm,
My feeling is I cannot see how
mm,
catastrophic collapse can be avoided. And to me, what we have to do is build as fast as we can the structures, but especially the mentality and the participants who will be there on the ground to build the alternatives building on the bits we've been able to produce here and now, after the dust clears, after the rubble has settled, I really think it's as serious as that, that
Mm.
what we are stuck with is a preliminary task, which we take up when the collapse has cleared away a lot of things that have to go. I mean, I think capitalism is in the process of getting rid of itself and clearing the ground for us. I do not think the path ahead will be smooth or easy. And you've got to have great concerns about whether we'll make it. But I do not have any doubts about what we have to do here and now.
I'll just invite, with John and Emily, what do you feel about this? Would you like to chime in with any thoughts?
Well, I agree with the value of the prefiguring that Ted referred to there, and I think that that's really the work that we have to do. I think that there are people have a growing consciousness of the fallibility of the current system, and that if they are champions of the alternative become more widespread and well known, whether they're political agents or celebrities or otherwise, have a presence, then they will become the the populist leader that we're seeing emerge in times of crisis. Have always seen in times of crisis. That can be authoritarian and divisive, which is the more likely. But I think it can also be like Mamdani in New York and current leaders in Colombia. It can also be populist on the left and answering the questions of quality of life and greater meaning and turning the vast majority of people against the few, the handful of billionaires who are otherwise largely influencing the current system. So I see that there is a potential softer fall that still largely requires the collapse to happen. But if there are people already carrying the flame, that it doesn't need to be as destructive. Of course, we're also largely thinking here from a wealthy white Western perspective, and we've got a long way to fall. On the flip side of that is rising economies in the global South who are aspiring to get to a place where they'll have further to fall. And I think that there's as much or more work to be done in that space, and billions of people who are the most vulnerable already. That that the influence needs to continue to spread to and help them to hold on to the good parts of what they already have in terms of local community and village life and so on, rather than driving development and progress, which is shifting to an extractive and exploitative model where they're detached from the things that actually have given them meaning and purpose for even throughout colonialism.
What about you, Emily?
uh, I sorry, what was the question?
That's all right. You don't have to yeah, feel pressured. I just thought I'd ask you. No, we were just talking about, I think specifically, yeah, just responding generally to what Ted was talking about, which was practical ways of that we actually get from where we are to this new sort of being and living.
Yeah,
But at
yeah.
the
I guess I did have a little thought about that, because I'm a teacher in a high school, and so I feel like influencing the youth to me seems like the only kind of smoothish way
Mm,
to potentially do that. Um, and I remember when I was a teenager, there was always like the raging against the machine and that kind of thing, which I haven't heard so much of with youth these days. But if we could, rouse up a bit of that excitement with young people, then saying like, yes, you cannot afford a house, you can't afford the petrol, but
Mm,
do you even really need it anyway?
mm,
And that you're spending your money on trying to aspire to buy these things is just making the wealthy people who are making the rules richer and more
mm,
powerful. Then if we can get a bit of some undercurrent of rebelling against the capitalism through that way,
mm.
potentially
Mm.
something could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the most effective anti-smoking campaign was directed at young people, saying it's billionaires who want you to smoke, and you're the fool by going along with it. You know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I do my postgrad. I'm doing, yeah, in philosophy at the University of Wollongong, and my supervisor is very interested in ecological education and basically, yeah, the need for expanding that. I think that education in terms of shifting values and culture over time is an incredibly important leverage point, perhaps one of the most crucial. Um, so yeah, I'll just open it up, and the three of you just feel free to respond as I read out the questions. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the chat, so please, if you do have a question and you'd like to just come on and speak, just, put your hand up if you have something to ask. But I'll start with this one in the chat, which is, do you think that claps will happen in our lifetimes? I'm 47. I mean, we'll try to move on from claps after this, but me and John and Emily discussed this a little bit before everybody tuned in that I've read some numbers before that are very concerning that, claps, if it's going to happen, might happen as early as 2030 potentially. So, yeah, well, curious to hear everybody's perspectives on that.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
think.
some people are saying that.
Mm,
Uh, I think it's a couple of decades at most, but the problems are accelerating, and the financial one is, very capable of going off quickly. Could I just make a couple of points on what John said a little earlier?
mm,
One is the fact that we are on the right path. I've been in this game for many decades, and we went for decades, a few of us, going on about the silliness of growth, and nobody took any notice at all. But now we've got a degrowth movement. Things are really going in the right direction fast. We're pretty small, but there's a lot there to be cheerful about. And another point John raised was the third world, the South. Look, some of the most encouraging movements are
mm,
indeed in the South. You've got
absolutely.
Sisters, Ubuntu, Campesinos, Satyagraha, Chikukwa in Africa. These are all peasant and tribal movements that have said, stuff you, system, we're going our own way. And they have a good chance of liberating themselves massively um, before us.
Mm,
Their conditions are different, and it's more easy for some of them to do it than
mm,
it is for us. But that's cheerful.
mm.
Yes, thanks for adding that. Yeah, I think there was a few other responses, yeah, in the chat along the lines of my thinking with regards to collapse. If we, I don't see it as a single precipitous moment where everything
Mm,
suddenly changes. I think that we're seeing that the Antarctic ice shelf, for instance, has already experienced very dramatic and rapid collapse. We've seen biodiversity losses of about 95% over the past 50 years in South America, for instance. Like that, if that's not collapse, we need to redefine collapse.
yeah.
So if we're just imagining when does it come to my world? Like when is it that suddenly my bank balance is zero, or whatever, or when is it hyperinflation happening in my country? If that's the kind of moment, then I guess it's anyone's gamble. But
Mm,
yes, I don't see it as a single one-off. Tomorrow we wake up and everything will be different. Although with the financial system, as Ted said, that may well be the case.
yeah, absolutely. There's that saying that yes, collapse is already here, it's just unevenly distributed.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely.
100%. I think another interesting thing I glimpsed in the chat, if no one's raised their hands, is somebody here mentioned, I can't find it, but they mentioned that they tried their hand at intentional communities, but that they believed it failed because Western people, or modern people in Australia are too culturally and materially tuned into individualism and consumption, and that it's just potentially too addictive or too difficult to untrain these people, which I mean, I guess uh, resonates very strongly with Ted, your point that actually a lot of indigenous peoples and peoples who have been less assimilated and integrated into the global value system are actually better positioned to, yeah, deconnect.
Yeah, but the collapse is going to drive Fred
Mhm.
Henry in the right
Mhm.
direction. He is going
Mhm.
to be confronted by the obvious fact that if he and his mates in the neighbourhood don't get together and do what they can to look after each other, they're in a lot of trouble. The conditions are going to drive us in that direction. So we'll be pretty fast learners, I think.
Mhm.
If we're lucky, that's what we will wake up in time. And again, remember that the appropriate, sensible alternative structures are being built in various places, not very spectacularly in Australia, but in places like Detroit and in the European cities, Liège, Belgium, and so on. The transition towns movement seems to me clearly to be the way we have to go, not the eco-village way. Eco-villages are very difficult to establish. You need a small group of dedicated, sensible people with a lot of resources. We can't save the world by just building eco-villages everywhere. But the eco-village has the immense responsibility of showing us the kinds of procedures and structures and culture that we have to implement in our transition towns work. The towns are already there, so a lot of building of new eco-villages doesn't have to take place, but the towns have to learn or recognise that the ways people in eco-villages do things, especially the cooperative structures and working bees and so on, are the things they have to implement. Now, I don't think that's immensely difficult to do, and it is happening within the Transition Towns movement, of which I have significant criticisms. They're not energetic enough or clear enough or working hard
Mhm.
enough at it, but they are the form that I think will get us there if anything does.
Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I am not sure how I feel yet. I know a lot about transition towns, but I don't have a lot of practical experience with it. So, does anyone have any questions? If you're just, feel free to put your hand up. I mean, is someone physically putting their hand up in the chat there? Richard?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
To follow on from what Ted was saying, I've been living in crystal waters in in Queensland for something like 18 years. Um, and it has tried the experiment of being food self-sufficient and self-sufficient in other ways. But and initially it was developed as a kind of a rural residential settlement. Each person was given an acre to experiment, and because of the spread, the sprawling nature of 1 acre development, we've got something like 7 kilometres of bitumen road connecting all of the properties, making the place very highly car dependent. Um, and in terms of kind of the property system, whereas the original properties that were sold off in 1988 are now reaching like $1 million mark, making it very difficult for young people to buy in. The ethics of the property system have scarcely been addressed here. And when I do try and raise my hand so that people are engaged with the problem, there just seems to be very little interest. But, but what I'd like to ask Ted about is, if we're going to have plastic water pipe and fittings and tap fittings and solar panels and batteries and so forth, it seems to me we can't escape the need for global supply chains. Not every village and every settlement can produce its own plastic water pipes and solar panels and batteries, because the resources for all of those things come from different places in the world. So we do need to ship materials and resources around the place. We need some way of global decision making in regard to those supply chains. So I'd like to ask Ted to respond to that.
Yes, of course we do, but it's a matter of vastly reduced scale. Think in terms of villages in a region, and there's things you would not want in every village, but you might have in the region within bicycling distance, or close enough for a small number of cars and trucks to get to using biofuels, sort of like your fridge repair factory in the region. And some things will be bigger still and mass produced further away, and your nation might need one steelworks. Now, the total amount of resource use and production of stuff would be dramatically less than it is now. But yes, you will still need some things that like produce solar panels or steel and whatever. So I don't think that's a major problem. But you certainly thereby have very, very little need for anything that needs to be imported into the country if our form of life is very simple in material demand.
Do you have any thoughts on that, John and Emily?
I guess relating to some of the work that's been done by Hickel and other academics in this area, uh, into on the papers that are called along the lines of a good life for all, they highlight that there's plenty of energy and materials extracted already in order to raise the living standards of the global population to what would be considered a good level, simply by reducing the luxury consumption items, by scaling back military and cosmetics, gambling, private vehicle manufacture, especially of luxury vehicles or SUVs, and making more of those resources, or directing more of those resources to public goods. So personal sufficiency, public luxury is kind of the touted catchphrase there, where if everyone is to have one of everything, then no, it's not possible. But if everyone is to have enough of everything or access to it in a pool or in a common resource, then we can all live very well.
Yes, and there's no need to worry about maintaining high tech where it's sensible. We could have more resources going into research in medicine and socially valuable things than we have now. So the simpler way vision must not be identified as a going back to the cave or turning off technical and social progress.
Yes, because I hear this critique a lot from people who are not well initiated into degrowth discourse. If you try to briefly touch on the issues with the polycrisis and modernity, coloniality, and these things, and you start to sketch out an alternative vision, they often will straw man you or with that sort of thinking and be like, well, but we have modern medicine and would you just get rid of that? There are no doctors out in the regions, there's no medical infrastructure. How are you going to solve that? And it's like, is there going to be high infant mortality rate? And it's like, no, that's not what we're saying at all. All of this infrastructure can be developed and there's no need to do away with any of the stuff that is beneficial in terms of, yes, physical and mental health. Yeah, maybe, are there any other questions? Just to raise your hand or, yeah, unmute yourself and shout out. Okay, we have one in the chat. How much land does a village need in low productivity, low rainfall areas of Australia to provide food, fuel, water, building materials, etc.? The archetypal European village was in high productivity environments. This is a good question because I also wonder this. Australia is a very large country with, a very different landscape, not what is the science around that, around different regions and their carrying capacities and all of that? A lot of research would need to be done into this if on a case by case basis, surely, if this movement became large enough.
Yeah, sure. Research is a very important part of this, and it connects with Richard's point. I regard Crystal Waters as a very valuable, heroic venture, a trial, way. We need to research what forms a village are best. Hell of a lot of work to be done in that area. We trial and error, and we gradually get clearer about where and how to do the village thing. I've recently published an article arguing that local small-scale agriculture is far better on all dimensions than agribusiness. So that article encourages you to believe that even in difficult areas, we can do miracles. But it may well be that we end up moving out of difficult areas to better areas to some extent. But the amount, if you've got some basics, then you can over time enhance the productivity of difficult areas, and soil and water in the long run, sort of to put it simply, about all you need, because you can grow stuff that traps nutrients and whatever, and build more robust systems. Remember, we're going to live in very resource simple ways where we don't need much steel or plastic, and we're going to be plant-based, timber-based, earth-based in most of the infrastructures we do build. So I'd be optimistic about, plus the research, what we can end up being able to do in the way of providing high quality of life in difficult areas. Remember Africa, a lot of it very dry, the Middle East. What's his name? The chap who does permaculture in Jordan and so on. Very surprisingly effective systems can be developed in difficult regions.
I've been reading Tim Flannery's The Future Eaters recently, which is 2008 publication, and I think that there is some updated research since then. But he highlights that for Australia, the circumstances are quite different for the rest of the world because of the extreme impacts of El Nino here. And that the reason that the Indigenous people of Australia mostly led a life of luxury was that their population was limited by El Nino conditions. That the cycle of El Nino of the kind of 5 to 7 years is long enough that the population cannot flourish during the good time because it's less than a generation, but it's long enough during the scarce period, the dry period, that everyone hits their resource limits and the population is limited by that. So I think that the estimated population of Australia for most of its 60,000 year history was under 1 million people spread across the continent. And mostly they're concentrated in the highest productivity kind of river deltas where they could retreat to during the El Nino time where there's still food sufficient. Now, we can argue that technology surpasses all of those things, but we also need to consider that the productivity of the soil and the availability of groundwater that we've been drawing on in our current agricultural practices are also, as Ted mentioned right at the start, deteriorating in quality and availability and abundance. So I think that the land requirement would realistically be quite vast, and we would need to consider much simpler way of life to exist in Australia without relying on, currently productivity is almost entirely driven by fossil fuel based fertilizers, and it's a temporary state of affairs.
Well, it seems like the conversation is just about to get really interesting in terms of this discussion about demographics and population size and, yeah, carrying capacity of Australia. I would be so interested to continue that conversation. I do think I have to bring the session to a close though, but hopefully we'll have more opportunities to explore all of these burning questions in the future. So, thank you everyone for being part of today's conversation, and a huge thank you to Jon and Ted for sharing their wisdom and experience. The recording of this will be available on Nina's YouTube channel very shortly if you'd like to revisit the discussion or share it with others. If today's session has left you curious about degrowth, sufficiency, simple living, and all those other good things, or if you'd like to continue to explore these lines of inquiry, please do join Nina's Degrowth Hub and become part of the Nina sphere. So, yeah, thank you again for joining us so much. I hope to continue the conversation with you all inside the hub and inside Nina more generally. Yeah, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for facilitating, Tarek.
You're welcome. Very welcome. It was my pleasure. Pleasure to be here with you all. Much love.